And I now give the floor to Ms. Abby Stoddard.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about the intensifying attacks against humanitarian personnel. My research group, Humanitarian Outcomes, runs the Aid Worker Security Database, which tracks major incidents of violence against aid workers around the world. Our data goes back to the late 1990s, and over that time, the numbers show a marked rise in insecurity for humanitarian operations. 30 years ago, fatal attacks on aid workers were not common, and the main risks to humanitarian staff were accidents and illnesses. Today, it's violence, both collateral and targeted, which claims more aid worker lives than any other work-related cause. As mentioned, last year, 2023, was the deadliest year for aid workers we had ever recorded, with 280 reported fatalities. That is more than double the annual average of the previous 10 years. That surge reflects violence and major warfare and mass civilian losses in Gaza and Sudan, as well as ongoing violence in South Sudan, along with 17 other humanitarian response settings where aid workers lost their lives. The death toll is in addition to at least 91 kidnappings and hundreds of serious injuries. 96% of these victims are national aid workers, providing aid to people within their own countries. Now, with 2024 not yet over, aid worker fatality numbers have already exceeded last year's awful total. As of this morning, the number killed is at 282 and counting. Rather than a short-term spike, in other words, it appears we are looking at something more like a step change. Another alarming trend in the data I would point you to is this. In recent years, state actors are responsible for the greater share of aid worker deaths as opposed to non-state armed groups and criminals. This again is a function of the type and intensity of conflicts now occurring. It is also partly the result of failures of deconfliction and resulting military strikes on humanitarian facilities and movements, despite the aid group's consistent participation in humanitarian notification systems. And we have growing evidence of rising detentions and bureaucratic obstacles to access for humanitarian material and personnel imposed by state governments and national militaries. The fact that the very actors charged with upholding international humanitarian law, with protecting and facilitating humanitarian aid, have instead become the main source of threat and impediment to it, speaks to the gravity of the situation and has serious implications for not only humanitarian access to people in need, but to global stability and order. Mr. President, the Security Council can play a critical role in reducing the risk to humanitarian aid workers so that more civilians can be safely reached by life-saving assistance. It's taken some important steps already. Resolution 2730 lays the groundwork for action towards greater protection and accountability, and I would like to strongly echo the calls to action we heard from Undersecretary General Michaud and Ms. Doughton today. I would add that research we've done in this area suggests the Council and member states could act decisively to reduce the risk in the further following ways. First, by taking additional concrete measures to address impunity. As you know, attacks on aid workers are almost never investigated or prosecuted. Resolution 2730 calls for countries to conduct full, prompt, impartial, and effective investigations of violations of international humanitarian law. In addition, or where this fails to prompt national level action, the Council could consider holding ad hoc tribunals or promoting other international legal means of achieving justice and disincentivizing these attacks. Second, by working to rebuild trust in deconfliction for humanitarian operations. Many humanitarians now distrust the notification systems, even fearing that their participation in some of these mechanisms might increase their risk due to conflict parties acting in bad faith. Collective action is needed to improve protocols and create accountability mechanisms for where deconfliction fails. And third, by calling on states and international organizations to empower local and national humanitarian actors, ensuring that they're accorded the same protections as UN and other international agencies. Local actors should be encouraged and facilitated to report all attacks and violations of IHL they experience, and they should be provided with equal resources and means of redress. This will also improve efforts to collect data on these incidents to ensure that the full scope and depth of the problem is known. Finally, Excellencies, I'd like to reemphasize that although the life of a humanitarian aid worker is worth no more or less than any other civilian affected by war, the steep rise in aid worker killings sends a particular signal of rising instability and decaying norms of decency and humanity. With every step change comes the risk that we adapt to it, as the unthinkable becomes the new normal. I urge us all to push back against this normalization, to retain the capacity to be shocked and the motivation to take corrective action. Strengthening protections of aid workers and insisting on real accountability for violence against them not only helps meet urgent humanitarian needs, it supports stability and makes peace building more possible. Thank you.